No, the Greeks invented democracy before Christ was even born. And 7th century, 8th century before Muhammad was born.
And Greeks are responsible for democracy being so popular and widespread. Is that what you're saying?
No, Britain mainly is responsible for that. It's just a historical fact.
In 1848,
Anyway,
revolutionists throughout Eastern Europe are more responsible for democracy, not Britain.
let's have a look. Coming back to India. And the point you raise is very valid. You came from a war zone in the Kashmir. And the point is that the common denominator in almost every war zone in the entire world, and the youngsters probably don't really know what a war means in terms of agony and horror and mutilation and maiming. You see it here. You haven't really been there. You haven't really talked to people, have you? So all war is hell, right? Can we agree on that? All war is hell.
Why are you calling it?
And the common denominator in almost every single war going on at present is not Islam, although that's present in many of them, is the fact that you have different peoples, different communities rubbing up against each other, very often forced to live together by their overlords, whether it's the Habsburg Empire or the communists or the capitalists. And if you want world peace, then you get it by separating people out a little bit, because it's human nature for most people, not for the airy-fairy intellectuals, it's human nature for most ordinary people who make societies work, to want to be basically with their own kind. And when they're forced to mix, you get bloodshed and horror. And that is what's happening in places such as Bosnia and Rwanda.
If you wanted to separate the human race, then why did your country? Why did British imperialism occupy half of the world?
While they were doing that, don't blame me, my great-great-grandparents were working down a coal mine in South Wales. So my people were exploited just as much as your people were by the British Empire and by early British capitalism. I'm not going to take any guilt. And I'm not going to accept that my children should not have their birthright because of something some capitalist bastard did in my country 5-6 generations ago.
You've had enough minutes.
Had enough now.
Man in the block here, please. Man in the block here, please. You've had enough time. Let's let other people have questions. Right here, please.
First, I think you're saying that slavery is inherent to Islam. Slavery has been everywhere. It's part of many economic systems. The Mexicans had slavery, the Americans had slavery, the Greeks had slavery. Second, the Greeks didn't invent democracy. Many tribes around the world have had democracy since very ancient times. It's something that has spontaneously developed throughout the world through civilization. The Athens didn't invent democracy. That's second, sure, there's a lot of people, black people who make crime, but that's because it's a class issue. A lot of black people are poor, and therefore people who are poor have a bigger tendency to do crimes. You are basically saying that there are some things that says that race is a biological issue, which is a thing that scientists have left out of existence, basically that theory, and in reality it's a class issue.
No, I was going to say, first of all, the point about slavery. Yes, you're right. Slavery has been an institution in probably the majority of human societies in history. I believe it's a bad institution. I believe it's a wicked institution that degrades the slave owner as well as the slave. But the fact is that Christianity and Chinese communism and Mexican Christianity and Mexican democracy, whatever, none of those have slavery or accept slavery now. But radical Islam does. And it's spreading. Therefore, if you don't like slavery, you've got to think that you should something to resist. There's the only political organisation in the world still standing for slavery, namely radical Islam.
Lord Liberation Army in Africa, which is a Christian army, endorses slavery, and it's Christian. It has nothing to do with Islam.
They're not remotely Christian. It's a bunch of voodoo lunatics. Come on, they're not remotely Christian.
Man in the back here with the beard.
American communities are trying to be taken over by the group that is trying to have us be forced to follow their ways and their rules and their
about the future of your society. You can't worry about all the problems. You can't begin to attend to all of them.
You can choose. You pick
So
and
the answer,
choose.
the answer is to look at the greatest problem first. And when you've dealt with the problem of radical Islam, then deal with the problem of radical Christianity, trying to impose what traditional Christianity, certainly the British version, Anglican Church, stood for a separation of church and state. And I believe that the separation of church and state is one of the fundamentals upon which democracy and freedom and most of the half-decent things in the world are based. And if you've got radical Christians who want to merge church and state, then they are a potential or present enemy of democracy, and oppose them by talking about what they do, by explaining what they do, and saying, if this expands further, it's a menace. But given the fact that although they're very rich, they have nothing like the money of the House of Saud, then I would suggest that the House of Saud and Islamic fundamentalism is a bigger threat than Christian fundamentalism. You should deal with the bigger threat first.
Man in the camera in the back.
You seem to be applying the issues of like across the world, trying to say what's happening there. However, two recent foundations found that in the survey of American Muslims, they found that the moderates they do not support the radical side. They on average have more money and more education than the population at large. Why now instead of why are you now saying we should stop Muslims in America? Why not look at them as a model of how relations that work, people work here, work in Britain, work in Europe, and work around the world?
So part of the experience in Europe, that the first Muslims that came there were certainly moderate, even the ones who were very poor. And most of the ones who were brought to Britain were extremely poor. They were brought to do jobs that bosses didn't want to pay decent wages for. But yeah, the first ones were remarkably moderate. The second generation are less moderate. The third generation are less moderate still. And it's partly because they are being ferociously indoctrinated by the House of Saud and its allies, including in Iran on the Shia side. But it's also because Muslims are enjoined by the Quran that they shouldn't cut up rough and start to push too hard until they are 10% of the population. And it's what their book, you must understand, it's nothing like the Bible in some ways. Any good Muslim believes that the Quran is dictated, I know that it's dictated by Allah. That's correct, isn't it? In a good Muslim's eyes, the Quran is literally the word of God as dictated to Muhammad. And it cannot be changed. It must be obeyed. So, Surah 8, Ayat 65
No, but if you knew anything about the Quran,
until you get to 10%,
Get your question in time, man.
until you get to 10% of the population, you can shorten the prayers. In other words, you can play down how Islamic you are. Once you get to 10%, you have a religious duty to use aggression and force and violence to help the spread of Islam through radical military jihad. It's what Allah told you you must do.
It's her turn now. Earlier you said that black people, we use the word black people in Islam as the slave. That is not true. Abid, it means, when it translates, it means God's slave. Anyone that is a servant of God. So what you're saying is not true. So before you want to speak about anything about the Quran, maybe you should be more educated before you open your racist mouth.
Which is given by the book is correct. Of course, it's the translation which is used by.
You don't speak the language?
Yeah, shut up. You don't know anything about it. If you want to talk about it, become more educated. No, if you want to talk about it, become more educated before you open your. Oh.
Yeah, at least you can vote in this country. You can't even drive a car. You couldn't even drive a car in Saudi Arabia. You couldn't inherit your